Masechet Kiddushin Daf Yud Chet. On yesterday's Daf, Rava taught that non-Jews can inherit their parents from the Torah. And his derivation was this pasuk, V'chishav im konehu, that if a non-Jew owns a Jew, then someone can come and redeem, a relative can come redeem that Jewish slave belonging to a non-Jew, and he'll calculate according to the number of years with its owner. And we infer from that with its owner and not with the heirs of the owner. We can learn from this, Miklal Di'it le'yorshim, that for other laws, in fact, a non-Jew does have heirs. In other words, if there are non-Jews living under Torah law, then they inherit to their children on a biblical level. Now we're going to see another derivation of that same law, and so we begin here. Rav Chiya bar Avin amar Rabbi Yochanan, Nochri yoresh et aviv devar Torah, dichtiv ki Yerusha le'esav natati et har se'ir. A non-Jew can inherit from his father. We know this from Pasuk in Devarim that says, Hashem says, I gave har se'ir to Esav as an inheritance. Inheritance means that it will go from generation to generation, and Esav is not Jewish. So there you go, a nice explicit Pasuk. But we ask, maybe Esav we should consider like not a non-Jew, but rather an apostate Jew. This is all very interesting. It's assuming that like Avraham and Yitzhak were Jewish, and Esav, the question is, are they Jewish because they were born from Jews, but they went off the derech and therefore an apostate Jew, or in fact this whole category does not apply because they weren't Jewish in the sense of afterwards. When after Matan Torah, when there's an officially a berit, and the word Jewish really comes from Yehuda. Okay, but nevertheless, this statement here, the Gemara here, is assuming that basically Avraham Yitzchak were Jewish, and maybe Esav should be considered Israel Mishumad, an apostate Jew, although he's an apostate and doesn't keep the laws, nevertheless would inherit, and maybe that's why he inherits, but other regular non-Jews would not inherit. Rather, a better pasuk, I gave to the children of Lot the city of Ad, as an inheritance. And Lot, surely we would consider a Gentile. He's not even a direct descendant of Abraham, and you see he gets an inheritance. So that's a nice explicit pasuk that Rav Chiya uses. Now we ask, Rav Chiya bar Rabin, Ma'itama lo amar ke Rava? How come Rabbi Chiya doesn't like the pasuk that Rava brought on yesterday's daf? Wait, that was just based on an inference. The pasuk doesn't really say it. The pasuk just says that if you want to redeem a Eved Ivri from a non-Jewish master, then you should make a calculation with the owner. It doesn't say explicitly with the owner and not with the children of the owner. Okay, you made that derasha. You can make that such a derasha, but it's not explicit in the pasuk at all. Maybe it just means, for example, with the owner, with the current owner, because that's who you're going to make a calculation with. This pasuk from Devarim is more explicit. Rava said, I don't think this pasuk regarding Lot is a good derivation, because maybe Lot is an exception, that he got an inheritance because of the honor of Abraham. To give Abraham honor, he says, oh, you know what, your nephew will also be given an inheritance, but he might be an exception to the rule, and other non-Jews generally may not have a law of inheritance. Now we go to the next topic. Tanu Rabbanan. Yesh be'ivri she'en be'ivriya v'yesh be'ivriya she'en be'ivri. Yesh be'ivri she'yoseh b'shen v'yovel b'mitat ha'adon ma she'en ken be'ivriya. This is a braita similar to braita we've seen before, but it's going to have some differences, and we're going to analyze all the parts of it. There are laws regarding a male Hebrew slave that are not true for a Hebrew, and the other way around, that are true for a female and not for a male, all regarding how they can go free. Regarding a male, he can go out after a number of years, after 6 years, and also Yovel, whichever comes first, he will go free during a Yovel, and or Yovel also, if it is Nirsa, will allow him to go free, and also if the owner dies, he goes free. Now this is curious, because a female also goes free in these three ways. So why is it saying that this is for a male but not a female? The Gemara will address that. Now, and this is not true for an Ivriya. Now, a female, she goes free with Simanim, once she gets signs that she of maturity, which is not true of a male. And she, a female, ama ivriya, cannot be sold twice. That will be important, and we'll see what that means. And furthermore, we redeem her against his will. Against whose will are we talking about? If it's redemption against the owner's will, well, that would be generally true for a man also. So we're going to explain it would be against the father's will. The family or the betin can force him to redeem. We'll see why. And that is not true for a male. Okay. Amar Mor, now let's analyze. Yesh bevri shen bevriya urminhu yetara alav amavriya shekona asma b'simanim. Over here you're saying that these three things are true for a man, but not for a woman. But we have a contradictory baraita that said, actually the Mishnah, our Mishnah, that says Amavriya has an additional way to go free over and above the man, which is Simanim, which means that those three items that were mentioned for a male are also true for a female. So why are you saying it's true for a male but not for a female? Rav Sheshat says that this Braita here, our Braita, the second one that we just read, is talking about a case where the owner designated her. Yi'ud is the process by which an owner takes an ama ivriya that he bought as a minor, and then he decides he wants to marry her. In order to do that, he doesn't have to give her any more money. But rather he just says Hareat Mekudeshetli or Hareat Miyu'edetli, and he treats her like a wife. He does something to treat her not as a slave, but rather as a wife, and that's it. And we'll discuss today whether that effectuates Kiddushin or Nisu'in. But either way, here Rav Sheshat says in this Baraita we're talking about that they already did Yi'ud. Once you do Yi'ud, then the only way to get out of that is going to be through a get, and not through the other three ways. Even though the years come, or Yovel comes, or the death of the husband, the death of the husband, that will end the marriage as well. But the point is that the slavery, in a sense, is over because it transforms into a marital relationship. So that's why these apply only to a man and not to a woman, because there is no yi'ud for a male slave. Now, ya'ada peshita gita ba'ya. Wait a second, if that's the case, that's talking about where the owner did yi'ud, then isn't this obvious that she doesn't go free in those three ways? She only goes free with a get. Yes, we're comparing slavery to marriage in some sense, even though they're actually fundamentally different. But the point is that she can only go back to her father's house or go to the next, do whatever she wants, marry someone else only with a get. Oh, it's giving a chidush. I might have thought that since she was sold by her father as an ama ivriya, that the original three ways that she goes free still continue even after yi'ud. That yi'ud adds an aspect of marriage to their relationship, such that she would leave by a get. But maybe the 6 years or yovel and the death of the husband also work to set her free even after yi'ud. And so that's why he's teaching me that no, after yi'ud, only get and not the other three ways. If so, then how come the rest of the Braita says that the female has a way to go out, and that's by becoming an adult with signs, because if she already did yi'ud, then that wouldn't end the marriage when she becomes mature. She continues to be married. So we say, okay, you have to add in some words that if he doesn't do yi'ud, then she will leave when she has signs of maturity. So it's a little difficult to read the Baraita that way, because we have to read the first half as being when he did yi'ud, and then she doesn't go free in those three ways, whereas the second half is when he didn't do yi'ud, and then she goes free with simanim. But anyway, that's a way that we can reconcile the Baraita with our Mishnah. Next Baraita, ve'enanim keret ve'nishnet. A woman cannot, ma'ivriya cannot be sold twice. So this, the Baraita taught that this was a law particular to a female slave. So we should infer from this that a male slave can be sold twice. Is that true? We have a problem, because look at this Baraita. Baraita says regarding he is sold because of his theft, meaning if he steals something and now he can't pay back. So the Bet Din will sell him into slavery. But we learned from that it's like a singular. He's sold for what he steals, but he's not sold for the double that he has to pay back. A thief that steals something has to pay back the original amount that he stole plus a fine that's double. So let's say he steals 500. So really now he has to pay back 1,000. But he's not sold for 1,000. He's sold only for 500. That's law number one. If a person, a Jew, goes and testifies about someone else, he says, on last Tuesday, I saw that guy, Mr. Cohen, he was sold as a slave. And look, he's walking free now. He's really a slave to that guy. And then turns out that the witness himself, other witnesses come, a second set, and say, you couldn't have seen that on Tuesday because you were with us in a different city. So therefore you're an Ed Zomem. The law of Ed Zomem is really he should get the same punishment that he tried to impose on someone else. And so he tried to make Mr. Cohen a slave, and therefore you would think maybe that witness, a false witness, the Ed Zomem, should himself become a slave. But this teaches, no, he only gets all sold into slavery if he steals, but not because he's an Ed Zomem. That's not an equivalent punishment. But here's the one that we really need. He gets sold for his theft, meaning with treating it as a singular, only for the one theft. Not bignev otav, and so we learn from that. Once he gets sold once, you're not allowed to sell him again. Let's say he steals $1,000, but he's worth $500 for his work for 6 years. So he gets sold once. You can't sell him again to make up the rest of the 1,000, right? That's it. He gets 500, and the victim of the robbery gets 500, and will lose out the rest because you can't sell him twice for one act. Okay, so now we have a problem because according to the first braita, it sounds like a female can't be sold twice, but a male slave can be sold twice. But in this braita, it says no, even a male can only be sold once. How can we reconcile them? We have two answers. Amar Rava lakashya kan begneva achat kan b'shnei genevot. The second braita is talking about one robbery. For one robbery, you only get sold once. So that even if he is worth 500 and he stole 1,000, he only gets sold once, and the victim loses out on the other 500. But the first braita that says a male can be sold multiple times, that's if it's multiple acts of robbery. He steals once, and then he gets sold, and then he steals again, and he'll get sold again. And that's true for a male, but not a female. A minor female can only be sold by her father one time, and that's it. Amar le Abaye bignevato tuva mashma. Abaye understands bignevato as a plural, and he says v'nimkad bigneva, like bignevotav, that he sold once even for multiple robberies. So therefore he disagrees with Rava's interpretation. Rather, el amar Abaye lakasha kan b'adam echad kan b'shnei b'nei adam. Abaye has a different way to reconcile the two braitot. The second one is talking about multiple robberies from one person. So this guy, he steals many times from one person, and each time he steals another $100. He stole 10 times. Nevertheless, he gets sold only once, let's say for 500. Whereas if he steals from many people, he robs everybody on the block, then he can in fact be sold multiple times because it's multiple people. So that's how we can explain the pasuk. There is a case where he sold minimkad once, bignev otav, for multiple robberies if it's one person. That's the second braita. The first braita talks about him being sold multiple times, that a female is only sold once, but a male can be sold many times, as because he robs from many different people. Good. Tenora banan. Genevo 1,000 shave 500 v'nimkar v'chozer v'nimkar. Genevo 500 v'shave 1,000 eno nimkar kelal. We have another braita here that Tanakama teaches that if someone stole 1,000 and he himself is worth 500 on the market for working for 6 years, so he will be sold and sold again to make up for the 1,000. This opinion does not accord not with Rava and not with Abaye, neither of their interpretation of those braitot. This is another opinion altogether. Now, if he steals 500 and he's worth 1,000, then you don't sell him at all because that's too much. Why should he go work for 6 years when he only owes 500 and now his work is worth more than that. It's worth more than 1,000. We don't say that he gets sold for half the time. There's no such thing as half the time, as we'll derive in a minute. So then he doesn't get sold at all. That's Tanakama. Rabbi Eliezer omer im haya genevo keneged mimkaro nimkar v'im lav eno nimkar. Rabbi Eliezer is even stricter in terms of that the person will be sold less often in less cases. He says he only gets sold if the amount that he's worth on the market to work for 6 years is exactly the same as the amount that he stole. He stole 500 and he's worth 500, then he gets sold. But if it's more or less, then he does not get sold. So whereas for Tanakama, if he's worth less than the amount that he stole, then he will get sold. So that's Rabbi Eliezer. Amar Rava b'hazachanhu Rabbi Eliezer Rabbanan demaishana genevo 500 v'shave elef de'eno nimkar de'nimkar kulo amar Rachamana velo chesyo achiname nimkar b'gnevato amar Rachamana velo nimkar b'chasi gnevato. Rava said in this argument, Rabbi Eliezer seems to triumph over the rabbis, because in terms of the logic, once you apply the logic one way, it should apply the other way as well. What's the difference between someone who steals 500 and he's worth 1,000? How come you don't sell him when he's worth more than what he stole? Because the pasuk says ve'denimkar, you sell all of him and you can't sell half of him. That's the point. You can't sell half a person, or you can't sell a person for half the time. It's all or nothing deal. Since 1,000 is too much to sell him, therefore he doesn't get sold at all. So once you agree, and that's what Tanakama said, if you agree to that logic, then you should apply it to the opposite case. He sold for his what he stole, is what the Torah said, and he shouldn't be sold for half of what he stole. If he stole 1,000 and he's only worth 500, he shouldn't be sold for half of what he stole, only for all of what he stole. And therefore, if once you interpret the pasuk one way, you should apply it both ways and agree with Rabbi Eliezer that he is sold only if he steals exactly the same amount as what he is worth. The Braita that we cited earlier also taught umaftin ota be'al korha, that a female slave can be redeemed against his will as opposed to a man. Now, who's the he pronoun in this phrase? So Rava first thought to interpret it as against the will of the owner, the master. He says, well, what kind of case would that be? If it's talking about where the father or someone or a relative pays money, well, that would be true for a male slave also, can be redeemed against the owner's will if you pay him. Right? If you pay him the the amount that is owed, and you deduct the number of years that he already worked. So that's true for a male and a female. So what would be a case that would be special, that a female can be redeemed against the master's will? So maybe maybe that the father wrote an IOU, a document for a value, says, listen, I don't have money now, but I'll pay you the $100 at some point in the future, and I redeem my daughter now. Well, would that work? Amai nakit marganita bide ibna le chaspa. The owner is holding a pearl in his hand, meaning this ama ivriya. She's valuable. She's working. And the father is giving a shard, a pottery shard is worth nothing. The document is just an IOU. Right now, it's not worth anything. Why would the owner agree to that? And why should we force him to accept such a thing? So it can't be that case. Rather means against the will of the father. The other family members can come to that father who sold his daughter off as a minor and say, listen, you're causing a family flaw. People are talking about us and saying, look, did you see that family? Had they sold their daughter into slavery? It's an embarrassment for us all. So we want you to go come up with the money and go redeem your daughter, and they can force him to do so. Wait a second, if that's true for a man, then it should be true for it's true for a woman, it should be true for a man also, that if someone sells himself into slavery, then the Bet Din can come in and force the family to redeem him because of the family flaw. It's not right for people to have this mark on their name that there's a slave in the family. So maybe a member of the family or the betin can go force other members of the family to redeem a male slave too. Wouldn't it be the same thing? And the answer is no. If a person is selling himself, that's because, he's down and out and poor and whatever, can't find a job or doesn't want to find a job. So it's easy for him to sell himself. If the family goes and raises money, they go raise $1,000 and redeem him. So now, okay, he'll be redeemed. And now what is he going to do? He's going to go back into the same thing and sell himself again. Every time the Eved, this guy, sells himself, he gets another $1,000. So now the family has to pay for him. He got $1,000. The family pays the owner back. And now he sells himself again to that, same guy, a different person, different owner. And he keeps making money. So therefore, we will not force the family to redeem their relative. But that should apply here also, that a father, if he's so poor, father doesn't want to sell his daughter, but he's so poor he can't even feed her, so he sells her. If we go force him to redeem her, and he's still going to be poor in the same situation, so he's going to end up selling her again. So it's the same thing. What's the difference between a male and a female? And the answer is exactly. Our baraita that teaches a female slave cannot be sold twice by her father. Once a father sells his minor daughter into slavery, if she should become free somehow while she's still a minor, he's not allowed to sell her again. Okay, umane, who is the author of this baraita that says a female, a minor, cannot be sold twice by her father? Rabbi Shimon is the opinion of Rabbi Shimon. We're going to actually see 3 different opinions altogether. So here it's recorded in the following baraita. Tanya, mocher adam et bito liyishut veshoneh, leshivchut veshoneh, liyishut achar shivchut, aval lo leshivchut achar ishut. According to Tanna Kama, he's very permissive, and he says that a father can sell his daughter as off as a wife. Right, the father has a right to not marry, not sell off, rather marry off his daughter as a wife, and then let's say she is widowed or divorced and she's still a minor, he can marry her off again and again. Also, he can marry her off as a slave, and then let's say that owner dies and she goes free and she's still a minor, he can sell her off as a slave again. Also, he can sell her off first as a slave, and then she goes free, and then give her over as a wife. You can do that. He can go from slavery to marriage, but not the other way around. He's not allowed to sell her shivchut after ishut. Once he gives her away, marries her off as a wife, he can't downgrade her and then sell her off as a slave. So all 3 possibilities are okay if they're equal or a step above, but not a step below. That's Tanna Kama. We'll see that this is the same as Rabbi Akiva's opinion that we're going to see in a minute. Rabbi Shimon Omer, Keshem she'en adam mocher et bito l'shivchut achar ishut, kach en adam mocher et bito l'shivchut achar shivchut. Rabbi Shimon, however, says just like a person cannot sell off his daughter as a maidservant after marrying her off, you can't do marriage and then slavery, you can't go down, everybody agrees to that. So too, you cannot sell her as a slave after being a slave. You can't sell her as a shivcha twice. So you see, this is Rabbi Shimon, is the same opinion as is the author of the baraita that says no shivchut achar shivchut. Ubepluta d'hanit tanae. This machloket between Tanna Kama and Rabbi Shimon parallels another machloket that we see in the following baraita, where we actually see the derivation. Tetanya bebigdo ba. Kevan shepiresh talito aleha shub en rashai lemochra divrei Rabbi Akiva. We're talking about these pesukim here, and it says, if imra'a ben adonai asher lo ya'ada, if the owner of this Amay who was sold to him as a minor, if he should marry her, but if he doesn't want to marry her and doesn't do yi'ud, and then he will help her be redeemed. Now she's redeemed. Now it's not clear who this is talking about. You could say it's referring to, in a peshat, it's referring to the master. The master has to allow her to be redeemed, and he cannot then resell her to some foreigner. because bigdoba, he has broken faith with her by not marrying her. That's kind of the idea. She'll do chores around the house until she's marriageable, and then you're supposed to take her in as a wife. Because he didn't do that, he can't resell her. He has to let her go free. That's a simple reading. But the Gemara is saying that the subject of lo yimshol mechra is actually the father. Once he sells her once to the owner, and the owner doesn't do yud, and she ends up being redeemed, or goes free, and however she goes free, redemption, the death of the owner, or yovel, whatever, the father cannot sell her off again. Am nochri doesn't mean a non-Jew; it means anybody else. Why? Because bigdoba. So let's see what bigdoba means. There's going to be two opinions. Rabbi Akiva says it's talking about marriage. Where do you see that? It comes from, I don't know if it comes from, but there's a similarity in Megillat Ruth. Ruth says to Boaz, Ufarasta kenafecha al amatecha. Spread your robe, your protective robe over me. So to cover, protect someone with a robe is a way of saying to marry. And that's, at least one of the reasons why in Sephardic weddings we have a talit, and the groom wears a talit and covers the bride with his talit. Right? That's an act of marriage, comes all the way from here. So, Rabbi Akiva is learning, is reading this word, bigdo ba, bigdo as beged. He put his garment upon her once she is married off to a groom who puts his garment upon her. Then the father, even if that marriage ends, the father is not allowed to then sell her off into slavery. So that's Rabbi Akiva's derivation. That's the same as Tanakama above, that the father is allowed to sell her slave after slave is okay. Marriage after marriage is okay. You can go from slavery to marriage, but once you do marriage, then that husband dies or divorces her, then the father cannot go and sell her to slavery, right? Because he cannot. Back to this pasuk. Once she is married off, he cannot sell her again. That's Rabbi Akiva. Rabbi Eliezer he says, he reads it more as peshat, because the father dealt badly with her by selling her off. He cannot do it again. So you sold her once, you made your money. It's not that was bad enough. You don't have a right to sell her again. So you see that this means there's no slavery after slavery. However, Rabbi Eliezer does not say anything about Rabbi Akiva's case. He just says no slavery after slavery. It's not clear. He may very well permit having slavery after marriage, because marriage is not dealing with her badly. So maybe there is slavery after marriage for Rabbi Eliezer. Now, before we get to Rabbi Shimon, what's the difference between their two interpretations? Rabbi Eliezer is following the Masoret, meaning the consonantal text. And so if you have the consonantal text, you could read it bebagdo, like bagad. Bagad means to rebel against, to betray. So bebagdo, the father betrayed his daughter by selling her off, and then he can't sell her off again. Rabbi Akiva gives preference over the vocalization, the way it's mikra, koreh, the way it's read. It's read bigdo, which means his clothing. You see that same word bigdo regarding Yosef and Eshet Potifar. Right? It says she grabbed bigdo. So there, that clearly means clothing. And so here, clothing means that since the groom spread his clothing over her and she was married off by the father, then he cannot sell her into slavery. No slavery after marriage. Now, finally, Rabbi Shimon says, we're going to give authority both to the way it's read and to the consonantal text, both authoritative at the same time. And therefore, he says both are prohibited. There cannot be, you can't do slavery after slavery. You also can't do slavery after marriage. He's combining the two. And that's exactly the Tanakama. in that baraita, and that also accords with our baraita that says that a ama ivriya cannot be sold into slavery twice. So all that is Rabbi Shimon. Rabbi Akiva is the Tanakama of the previous baraita, and Rabbi Eliezer is his own opinion. Good. Now we get to the question. By Rava bar Abu, Yehud nisuin oseh or erusin oseh? Rava bar Abu asked the question: when a master does Yehud, that says he buys a slave, an amavriya as a minor, and then he decides, I want to marry her, and so he designates her by saying, he doesn't have to give any more money, because the original sale price acts as the money. We'll see a machloket about that actually, but let's assume that for now. The question is, when he does Yehud, does that effectuate full marriage nisuin, or is it only erusin, and he still has to do nisuin after that? What would be the practical difference? A practical difference would be, let's say she dies after Yehud, but before a full act of nisuin. If the Yehud is full nisuin, then he can inherit her property. If Yehud is only Kiddushin, so when they're mikudeshet, he does not inherit her. Or if he's a kohen and she dies, then if they're fully married, then he could be tameh to her. If they're not fully married, only kiddushin, he cannot become tameh for her. And to have the sole right, if it's nisuin, the husband, owner, now husband, has the full right to undo her vows alone. If not, if it's only kiddushin, then he and the father have to both come together to undo her vows. So there are practical differences. What's the answer? We're going to propose a couple of different attempts at a solution. Tashema bibigdoba kevan sheperas talito alea shub eno rashay lemochra. We're quoting Rabbi Akiva, who said bibigdoba means once a minor, once a girl, a daughter, is married off by a groom who covers her with his protective talit, then he cannot sell her again. So what does that mean? That means the father cannot sell her into slavery after marriage, but he can marry her off again. I know it says Yehud here, which usually means what the owner of Amavriya is doing, but the Braita means that the father would be setting her up for marriage, similar to Yehud, again, designating her, hey, go and be married to this guy. Okay, so that was Rabbi Akiva learned that you can do you cannot have slavery after marriage. Now, okay, since it says over here that after marriage the father can marry, after Yehud rather, the father can marry her off again. Well, if Yehud was nisuin, was full nisuin. So again, let's think of the scenario. The father sells off his daughter as a slave. Okay, now she ends up getting the master does Yehud, and then the master, let's say, dies, and now she goes back to her father's house. So she already did Yehud. If you would say that Yehud is full marriage, everyone agrees that there's no marriage after marriage. Once a father marries off his daughter and she does kiddushin and nisuin with that guy, and then she's widowed or divorced, everyone agrees that she's fully out of the house at that point, and the father has no rights over her ever again after marriage, even if she's still a minor. And therefore, there would not possibly be a case of bibig doba, that since he married her off, then he can't sell her off, but he could marry her off again. There's no such thing as marriage after marriage. Rather, it must be it's erusin. That would make sense. The father gives his daughter over as a ma'ivriya. The owner does Yehud, which is only effectuates kiddushin. He dies, so she only had kiddushin. She goes back to her father's house. Then he can marry her off. After that, that would be permissible. So that's a proof that Yehud only does Kiddushin. Kiddushin and Erusin mean the same thing. Amar Rav Nachman bar Yitzchak, Hacha beKiddushin de alma ka'eh. Everybody's like, I don't agree with that proof. That statement of Rabbi Akiva, it's not actually clear that it's talking about a father who sold his daughter into slavery as a ma'ivriya, and then the owner did Yehud. It could be talking about a simple case of a father giving over his daughter is Kiddushin. No slavery involved. He accepts money from some groom, and now now she's mikudeshet, and then she's divorced from Kiddushin, or that groom dies. That's what it's talking about. Once he does Kiddushin, he marries off his daughter with Kiddushin. He cannot sell her as a slave, but he can marry her off again. What it means is, once he gives her over, a father gives over his daughter to someone who will be obligated for her food, clothing, and shelter, then he cannot sell her as a slave ever again. But this is not related to Amai Vidya, and not talking about a case of Yehud, and therefore you can't learn anything from this source about whether Yehud effectuates Kiddushin or Nisuin. So we're going to try another proof. This next Baraita will be a conclusive proof that in fact Yehud effectuates Kiddushin only. Tashema en mochra likrovim mishum Rabbi Eliezer amuru mochra likrovim. The question is, if a father sells off his daughter, can he sell her off to a close relative that she is not allowed to marry? For example, her own brother. Of course, he won't be able to do Yehud or marry her, but does the sale go through? So Tanakama says no, he cannot sell her, but Rabbi Eliezer says you can sell her even to a close relative, even though Kiddushin will not be possible. Not only is it not allowed, if a brother tries to give a ring or whatever, the Kiddushin won't work. Yehud won't even work. But nevertheless, even though it cannot lead to Yehud, still the sale is a valid sale. Now, even though they disagree regarding close relatives, that would be arayot. V'shavin shemochra lamana lekohen gadol, gerusha v'chalusa lekohen ediot. Both Tanakaman and Rabbi Eliezer agree that a father can sell off his daughter, who is an almana, to be a slave for a kohen gadol, even though there will be a prohibition for the Kohen Gadol to do Yehud or marry her. And the same thing with if she is Gerusha or Chalutza, to marry her or to sell her as a Ama Ivriya to Kohen Gadol, even though there also it cannot lead to Yehud. Now, in those two cases, even though the Almana is not, the Kohen Gadol is not permitted to marry the Almana, and the regular Kohen is not permitted to marry the Kiddusha or Chalusa, if they do, the Kiddushin is in fact valid. They violate a lav, and we have to separate them, but the Kiddushin is valid. And therefore, even Tanakama would agree that it's permissible for the father to sell his daughter off to one of these, even though it won't be permitted for them to do Yehud, but still it's possible for them to do Yehud, and therefore the sale is a valid sale. Now, we ask, how could you possibly have a case of a minor daughter who is an almana, and now the father is going to sell her off again? If you're going to say, well, see, the problem is, if the father married her off and it's full nisuin, and then the husband dies, so now, after a full nisuin, she's no longer under her father's jurisdiction. And so he would not be able to marry her off or sell her. He would certainly not be able to sell her after that as an Ama Ivriya. So maybe it means that she accepted Kiddushin on her own. See, the father, you could say, if he marries her off, then he can't sell her into slavery. But what if she marries herself off as a minor? So she married herself off originally, that husband died, and now you could say since the father didn't marry her off the first time, the father still has the right to sell her off as a slave. But that can't be true, because a minor does not have the proper mindset to be able to accept Kiddushin. So the marriage is actually not even a marriage, and she would not even be called an almana. So it can't be that case. If the father is the one that married her off and accepted the Kiddushin, then he wouldn't be allowed to sell her off after that, right? We're following the opinion of Rabbi Akiva, as we said before, that there's no slavery after marriage. So that can't be the case. So, and the name of Yitzchak says, we're talking about Kiddushin from Yehud. In other words, the first marriage was that the father sold her off as an Amai Vriyah, and then someone did Yehud, the owner did Yehud, and then he died. And so that's how she's an almanah. So the father only sold her off into slavery. Now, more specifically, we're going to see on the next staff there's a machloket. When the owner does Yehud, where is the value that he is giving her? The majority opinion that we've been assuming until now is that the original sale price, even though it was paid a while ago, that turns into the case of Kiddushin. The owner gave that money to the father, and so later on the owner can just say, and that money was already given and the father accepted it. So that's fine. But according to Rabbi Yosef Rabbi Yehuda, and we're about to see his opinion, he says that no, let's say it's 10 days before the end of the slavery, when she's going to become an adult or when the 6 years are up, and the owner at that point says, you know what, the following 10 days you don't have to work for me. I'm giving them to you. You're no longer a slave. I'm giving you that. She accepts that, right, and says, okay, good. I'd like to not be a slave. That would be good for me. And so she accepts that freedom as her kiddushin. She's accepting it on her own. Now, why is this relevant? We'll see in a second. If you say that Yehud does nisuin, then it really doesn't matter who accepts, if it's the original money or it's the end of the slavery now. Once someone is married, the girl is married, she's out of her father's domain completely, and the father would have no right over her at all. So it can't be that Yehud does nisuin. So ve'lamai erusin oseh ve'shavin shemochra ha'en adam mocheret bito l'shivchut acharishut. Wait, so how does it help if you say that Yehud does only erusin? And everybody, it says in the Baraita, everybody agrees that he can sell her after she is an almanah. But we already saw that a father cannot sell his daughter as a slave after accepting kiddushin, and in this case, she accepted kiddushin. So how can we solve it? There's a difference between her accepting the kiddushin and him accepting the kiddushin. If a father accepts kiddushin, let's say a regular case of him accepting kiddushin, or a case of Yehud, according to the other opinion, the majority, that the original sale price actually is the kiddushin. In either of those cases, the father accepted kiddushin. And so, once the father accepts kiddushin, marries off his daughter, then, according to Rabbi Akiva, he is not allowed to sell her into slavery. And so, there would be no case here of selling her off after almanah. Rather, there must be a difference between him receiving it and her receiving it. When she receives it, so now we're following the opinion only of Rabbi Yosef Rabbi Yehuda, who says it's not the original money of the sale price as kiddushin. Rather, it's the owner saying you no longer have to be a slave from now on, and she accepts that herself. So the father did not sell her, did not give her over into marriage. Here is a case where she did it herself, even though she's a minor. She accepted her own kiddushin, and that's at that point that there's kiddushin, that Yehud is only kiddushin. That owner dies, and now she goes back to her father's house. At that point, the father is permitted to sell her as a slave because he never married her off as a wife in kiddushin or nisuin. He didn't do anything. She did it. So he still retains the full rights over her. And then that's the case of an almanah girl who can be sold off. So you see, it makes sense. And this proves it's the only possible case we can come up with of selling as a slave after almanah, and this proves that Yehud does kiddushin only. Now we ask, in that case, why don't you say that Yehud does nisuin fully and say that, yeah, if the father accepts the kiddushin and then she has nisuin, then he can't marry, then he can't sell her off as a slave. But if she accepted the kiddushin, like in this case, and even if she accepted the yi'ud, even if you would say that effectuates nisuin, maybe nisuin you can have selling off into slavery after nisuin, as long as she's the one that accepted the kiddushin. So maybe there's a difference between his acceptance and her acceptance also, but for nisuin, and now you have no proof. Haimai bishlam erusin shane ela nisuin min nisuin mishane, and we say no, that's not convincing. It makes sense to distinguish between erusin that the father accepts and then he's no longer able to sell her off, and erusin that she accepts, in which the father retains the right to sell her off, because erusin is only a partial designation for marriage. But nisuin is fully, by definition, nisuin means she left her father's domain and completely entered into her husband's domain. And it doesn't matter how it came to be, who accepted the money, who accepted the yi'ud, it makes no difference. Nisuin, by definition, means leaving her father's domain, entering into the husband's domain. In that case, no matter how she got in, once the husband dies, she is an almanah, and she is not under her father's authority. The father cannot sell her off. And therefore, we have a good proof that yi'ud does kiddushin only. We're talking about a case where she accepted the yi'ud herself, by now not having to work for the rest of the time that she would otherwise have to work, because she accepted it herself. The father still retains the right to sell her after the husband dies. Last point. This braita, is it possible to explain it according to the other opinion, the opinion of Nachman bar Yitzchak, who says that all Tanaim, even Rabbi Yosef, Rabbi Yehuda, think that the original sale price, that's the kiddushin, and so therefore it's the father that accepted that kiddushin, so the father did marry her off. How could you ever have a case of selling her as a slave after almanah? We could say that this baraita, this whole time we were assuming that the baraita was following the opinion of Rabbi Akiva, who says you can never do a downgrade. You can't have wife first and then you can't have yi'ud or kiddushin first and then sell her off as a slave. But this opinion, Rav Nachman bar Yitzchak could say that the Baraita is following the opinion of Rabbi Eliezer that says you can't have slavery after slavery. The father cannot sell her, but he can give her over into marriage for kiddushin or for yi'ud, that is kiddushin only, as we've proven, and then then she is widowed because that husband dies. The father still has the right, after ishut, he can still sell her into slavery, and so it could be the opinion of Rabbi Eliezer. Either way, after nisuin, surely there is no way that he could ever sell her into slavery again. And so, whether you say that she's the one that accepted the yi'ud, or the father originally accepted the yi'ud with the original money, yi'ud only effectuates kiddushin. Baruch Adonai le'olam, amen ve'amen.